So this is my first scripted video, which is wild. Today I want to talk about something that happens to me more often than I'd like it to, which is going off of my meds. I talk about it a little bit in my vlog that's coming out on the 7th, which I filmed like during my most recent time off of my meds. I should probably tell you my story of getting onto meds, so here's that. When I was in my junior or sophomore year of high school, I finally started seeing a therapist after I had a really big breakdown. Said therapist honestly wasn't that good. She didn't really seem to listen to me. She used my birth name. She used the wrong pronouns, despite the fact that I was out and she knew that I was out to my parents. She also never formally diagnosed me with anything, which was aggravating because it made me feel really lost and misunderstood and unheard. However, she did prescribe me Zoloft. I saw her for about a year, I think, before I stopped and went off the Zoloft for a bit over like the summer while I was searching for a psychiatrist. I found one and he did put me back on Zoloft and I would see him once a month. However, I was also going to him with the intent to get medication for my ADHD. I've been on Strattera since I was little, about 7 or so, which was right after I got diagnosed. But I weaned myself off of them because a 7-year-old should totally have control over their own psychiatric medication. I actually do think that kids should get a say in their treatment, but nobody in my life actually explained to me what the hell was happening. So I went back on the meds for a short bit of time between 10th and 11th grade, which wasn't as good of an experience as intended. They didn't really help me. But when I went off of them, I would become terribly nauseous for a day or two, and then become nauseous again when I went back on them. Not an ideal setup. So I'm at this psychiatrist because I wanted to get ADHD meds that could work without me feeling like I was maybe possibly dying. Because psychiatrists can't diagnose people, I had to get a diagnosis on my own, which was very hard, as I was very anxious, especially about phone calls and talking to new people. At my second appointment, he told me not to come back until I had a proper diagnosis, because it had been 9 or 10 years since my first diagnosis. And ADHD, a lifelong condition, apparently needs to be retested just in case. And because I was too anxious to find someone to diagnose me, I ended up having to go off my meds for like a month. It was a low dose, and I don't quite remember what happened, but I know that I was miserable. That much I do remember. Around that time, though, I did go to my physician for my, biannual checkup, and I learned that 1, they had a social worker who could diagnose me with ADHD. 2, they could fill my Zoloft prescriptions. So I was back on the meds, and I saw their social worker. She did diagnose me with ADHD, and I think anxiety, but it wasn't really clicking, so, between that and the fact that I had to go away for school, I stopped seeing her, but I'm still on Zoloft through my physician. Anyways, so on to what prompted me to make this video. After this, also, this is a content warning for graphic talk about, a mental breakdown, kind of, and also discussion of suicidal thoughts and such. So I'm totally cool if you click away if you're uncomfortable hearing about that or that's upsetting to you. No hard feelings. So earlier this week, for me, the past 2 days, because I'm filming this the day I wrote this because I'm on top of my shit, about a week before this will be uploaded, I accidentally went off of my meds for the second time in about a month. And I'm gonna use the rest of this video to talk about both of those times. I'm gonna start with the prior time, and then do the most recent time. So I mentioned that I have ADHD, and that means I can be, very forgetful. And the thing I'm most liable to forget is to take my meds. The first time I went off my meds was because of that. I forgot to take my meds for 2 days in a row, which for me meant that I got very low energy and my emotional regulation just kind of vanished. I can't remember the exact contents of the day, but if it was the same day that I think it was, in one day I got in an argument with someone I trusted who thought it was okay to use the R slur, which makes me feel very unsafe, and then act like I was the aggressor in the situation for asking them to check their privilege. And then also I got the lowest grade I've gotten in my French class all year, which was way lower than I expected. And I think that was also the day that I learned that Charlie's staying in Boston this summer. And like each of these things I could for sure handle if they happened like individually. Definitely if I was on my meds, but when they piled up and I was medless, I was brought to what was probably my most suicidal in a very long time. I think since last semester. I did not trust myself to be alone, so I set up shop in the library and I asked my friends if I could hang out in their dorm to feel safe once they were out of classes. And after I made it back to my dorm, I did take my meds and I showered and I did feel a little better. But I was still rattled, so I went over to my friends until I felt stable enough to be alone again. I know that the logical thing to do would have been to just go back to my dorm and take my meds as soon as possible after I remembered that I hadn't taken them, but the multiple times I went back to my dorm that day, I would get there and completely forget that I needed to take my meds, even with it written on my hand. I was also so immobilized by fear that it felt safer to stay where I was in the library than to try to go back to my dorm. I do also have a toolbox in my dorm, and I keep a knife in my purse, which was in my dorm at the time, so I didn't trust myself to go back and behave safely until my meds kicked in. The second time I went off my meds was the past couple of days, for when you're watching this, about a week ago. I did know what to anticipate, though. It wasn't a slip of the mind that led me to forgetting them, it was instead an event that made me realize that my life definitely sounds like a sitcom. Saturday, I went down to New York City, and as I was leaving, I tried to pull open the top drawer of my dresser, which is where I keep my extra Polaroid film. I wanted to have some on hand because I didn't have a lot of shots left in the current pack that's in my camera. And the door was stuck. I had to leave, so I didn't really think much about it, and I forgot until the next day. The problem is, I also keep my meds in that drawer. This wasn't really a problem Saturday because I keep my meds in a pill container, which I fill at the beginning of every week. And so I had Saturday's meds, but Sunday obviously wasn't filled yet. I realized I had no idea when I would be able to access my meds next, so I buckled down knowing it might be a few days, so I had to plan for what that would entail. First, I knew I wouldn't be able to go outside because it was spring, and I wouldn't be able to take my allergy medications, and I have really bad seasonal allergies. Secondly, I knew I'd be exhausted, so I resolved to minimize my energy output/usage and let myself sleep as much as needed. I ended up not going to class on Monday because I knew that would take too much energy, and I ended up sleeping instead because I felt like I was completely drained of all energy. And thirdly, I knew that my emotional regulation would be a complete mess. So I decided to only surround myself with things that would make said dysregulated emotions positive ones, kind of, which took the form of watching John Mulaney videos on Netflix and videos of the Great Comic Cast being amazing. I also did put in a work order to have maintenance help me, but because it was the weekend, I would have to wait a few days, so I got help from friends. 1 broken spoon, 4 unsuccessful queer kids, an impromptu deep cleaning of the area behind my dresser, and learning what was blocking the drawer. It was my curling iron. We did manage to at least rescue my meds Monday afternoon, but the drawer was still wedged shut. When I wrote this earlier today, I had come back from the dining hall and my drawers were just sitting on the floor. All the stuff that was on top of the dresser was also on the floor or my desk. And so the frame of the dresser was just gone. So I got changed, left, and was well, I sure hope that they fixed that. And I came back after class, and they did, and everything's fine now. I told the story partly as a story time type thing because my life is absolutely ridiculous sometimes, and partly to normalize medication. I used to worry a lot and I still do sometimes, about meds changing who I am or me becoming like super dependent on them. But the thing is, people who don't take meds, they're just as reliant on what my meds do for me, because their brain just does it for them naturally. Zoloft is an SSRI, which is selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor. It doesn't make serotonin, but what happens is the serotonin is released, and then after a period of time, it gets, like, sucked back in. Except my brain naturally does that too fast, so I don't get the benefits of the serotonin. But my meds are like, you need to stop, slow down, and let the serotonin chill for a little while. And it's great. I love it. I love having that. It's fabulous. For me, that allows me to be able to regulate my emotions better, as I, without my meds, experience really intense, sudden, and short-lived mood swings, and also the meds do help me counteract my chronic fatigue, which is awesome. Going off of my meds is definitely terrifying, but I'm slowly learning how to cope if it is out of my hands. Also, as far as, like, it changing who I am, this is who I would be if my brain functioned the way it's supposed to. My meds are just letting me be who I should be. So to anyone who is watching this who's on meds or might go on meds, there's nothing wrong with that. You're just getting your brain and body functioning closer to how other people's do, and I'm very proud of you for that because there's so much stigma behind it. So good on you.